Discover the classified CIA program that erased minds. 2 decades of secret experiments on unknowing Americans that the government would rather you forgot.
Chapter 1: The Cold War and the Birth of a Monster. The year is 1950. Across the globe, the Iron Curtain has descended, dividing the world into 2 irreconcilable halves, each armed with weapons capable of ending civilization, each convinced that the other was prepared to use them. The United States and the Soviet Union stared at each other across a chasm of mutual terror, and in the shadows of that terror, something monstrous was being born.
The spark that lit the fuse came from Korea. American prisoners of war returning home from the brutal conflict on the Korean peninsula had done something that terrified the CIA's leadership more than any nuclear threat. They had confessed. Before cameras and journalists, they had admitted in calm, coherent voices to deploying biological weapons. They had denounced their country. They had praised the enemy. Men who had been brave soldiers, men whose loyalty had been forged in the fires of training and combat, had been somehow turned. The CIA called it brainwashing, and the word spread through the national security establishment like a contagion. If the Soviets and the Chinese had developed a technique to rewrite a human mind, to erase loyalty and replace it with compliance, then the free world was already defeated. Allen Dulles, the CIA's director, a silver-haired patrician who wore his power with the casual ease of old money, sat in his office in Langley and contemplated the unthinkable. The enemy had found the key to the human mind. The Cold War was not merely a race for missiles and bombs. It was a race for something far more intimate, far more terrifying. The ability to control what a man believed, what he would say, what he would do. And the Americans were losing. The institutional response was swift and, in the logic of the Cold War, inevitable. If the Soviets had mind control, the United States needed mind control, needed it better, needed it faster, needed it to be weaponized.
2 predecessor programs had already been quietly underway. Project Bluebird, launched in 1950, and Project Artichoke, launched in 1951, both probing the dark territories of hypnosis, narcotics, and psychological manipulation for interrogation purposes. These programs had built the infrastructure, trained the personnel, and, crucially, established the institutional culture of secrecy and impunity that would make what followed possible. Scientists with security clearances worked in hidden laboratories. Funds flowed through channels that bypassed congressional oversight. The machinery of covert human experimentation was already turning, waiting only for a man bold enough or ruthless enough to accelerate it to full speed. That man was being identified even as Dulles contemplated his options.
In the Technical Services Division of the CIA, a young chemist with a club foot and a slight stutter had been working on questions that consumed him. Could chemistry unlock the doors of the human mind? Could the right compound transform an enemy agent into a cooperative subject, bypass the iron will of a trained operative, penetrate the psychological defenses that training and ideology had built? The chemist's name was Sidney Gottlieb,
and he was about to be given powers that no scientist in American history had ever wielded. Powers that he would use with a reckless, visionary confidence that left shattered lives scattered across 2 continents. The Cold War had created a monster. On April 13, 1953, CIA Director Allen Dulles put his signature on a classified memorandum and gave the monster a name: Project MK Ultra.
Chapter 2. Sidney Gottlieb, the Black Sorcerer.
To understand MK Ultra is to understand Sidney Gottlieb. And Sidney Gottlieb is one of the most extraordinary, disturbing, and ultimately tragic figures in the history of American intelligence. Born in 1918 in the Bronx to Austro-Hungarian Jewish immigrants, Gottlieb grew up with a clubfoot that required surgery and left him with a limp, and a stutter that made ordinary social interaction a constant challenge. He compensated with ferocious intellectual ambition. He earned a Ph.D. in biochemistry from the California Institute of Technology, became an expert in agricultural chemistry and toxicology, and somehow found his way into the CIA's Technical Services Division, where his peculiar combination of scientific brilliance, Cold War fervor, and moral flexibility made him exactly the kind of man the agency needed.
Colleagues called him the Black Sorcerer. The nickname was not entirely metaphorical. Gottlieb was a man of startling contradictions. He practiced yoga decades before it became fashionable in the West. He kept goats on a Virginia farm. He folk danced at CIA gatherings. He was, by all accounts, personally kind, intellectually humble in many domains, and capable of genuine warmth. He was also, in his professional capacity, a man who could order the covert administration of mind-destroying drugs to unwitting human subjects with the same equanimity that another man might order a laboratory experiment on mice. The contradiction was not hypocrisy, it was ideology. In the logic of the Cold War, as Gottlieb understood it, there were no innocent bystanders. There was only the struggle for survival between American freedom and Soviet tyranny. And in that struggle, ordinary moral rules were a luxury that could not be afforded.
The instrument that Gottlieb believed would unlock the human mind was LSD, lysergic acid diethylamide, a compound first synthesized by the Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann in 1938 and discovered to be psychoactive in 1943. Gottlieb became convinced that LSD was something far more significant, a potential truth serum, a way to disorient an enemy agent so completely that his psychological defenses would collapse, leaving his secrets exposed. The CIA purchased the entire world supply of LSD from Sandoff. 10 kilograms, enough for roughly 100 million doses for $240,000. With that purchase, Sidney Gottlieb effectively controlled one of the most powerful psychoactive substances ever discovered. What followed was not science in any meaningful sense of the word. What Gottlieb ran was something closer to a campaign of chemical warfare conducted against American citizens in the name of defending them.
MK Ultra eventually expanded to at least 150 sub-projects conducted at 80 institutions, including Harvard University, Stanford University, Johns Hopkins, and dozens of hospitals, prisons, and CIA safe houses. The program operated through a network of front organizations that funneled CIA money to academic researchers without revealing its true source. The Society for the Investigation of Human Ecology, a name designed to sound innocuously academic, was one such conduit.
researchers at prestigious institutions received grants, conducted experiments, and published papers without knowing that their work was being directed from Langley. The CIA had penetrated American academia with the thoroughness of a counterintelligence operation, turning the nation's centers of scientific inquiry into unwitting instruments of a program that had no place in any civilized nation's definition of research. Gottlieb would run MK-Ultra for nearly 2 decades. He retired to his Virginia farm, wrote unpublished poetry about the natural world, and died in 1999, 6 months before he was scheduled to give a deposition in a lawsuit brought by MK-Ultra victims. The Black Sorcerer had one final piece of luck. He died before he could be fully called to account.
Chapter 3: Operation Midnight Climax.
Of all the sub-projects that fell under the vast shadowy umbrella of MK-Ultra, none was more bizarre, more sordid, or more revealing of the program's fundamental moral bankruptcy than Operation Midnight Climax. It began in 1954, launched under the direction of George Hunter White, a federal narcotics agent to the old school, a man who drank heavily, carried himself with the bravado of someone who had spent his career in the criminal underworld, and who embraced his role in Midnight Climax with what his own diary entries suggest was genuine enthusiasm. White was not a reluctant participant in the program. He was, in the fullest sense of the word, a willing instrument of the state's most degraded impulses. The concept was straightforward in its depravity. The CIA needed to observe LSD's effects on subjects who had no idea they were being dosed.
The solution was a prostitution sting. The CIA rented safe houses in San Francisco's Telegraph Hill neighborhood and later in Greenwich Village in New York City. White furnished these apartments in what his diary describes as a garish style intended to put clients at ease. Shag rugs, colored lights, erotic art on the walls, a bar well stocked with alcohol. The apartments were wired for sound and equipped with one-way mirrors behind which CIA operatives, and often White himself, could observe the proceedings unseen. Prostitutes hired and paid by the CIA brought clients back to these apartments. The clients, men who had no idea they were participating in a government program, men who thought they had arranged an ordinary, if illegal, transaction, were given drinks laced with LSD. What happened next was observed, photographed, and recorded. George White watched from behind his one-way mirror, drink in hand, and recorded his observations with the detachment of a scientist observing laboratory animals.
The human reality of what Midnight Climax meant for its victims was and remains deeply troubling to contemplate. These were not criminals, not enemy agents, not even men who had consented to any kind of experiment. They were ordinary people who had simply made the mistake of hiring a sex worker in the wrong city on the wrong night. They were suddenly, without warning, plunged into one of the most disorienting experiences the human nervous system can undergo. Some of them almost certainly believed they were going insane. Some may have experienced terror so profound that it left permanent psychological marks. None of them were told what had happened to them. None received follow-up care. They were observed, analyzed, and then simply released back into their ordinary lives, carrying an experience that had been inflicted on them by the government of the United States without their knowledge or consent. The Midnight Climax safe houses operated until the mid-60s. George White wrote in his diary, "I was a very minor missionary, actually a heretic, but I toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was fun, fun, fun." Where else could a red-blooded American boy lie, kill, cheat, steal, rape, and pillage with the sanction and blessing of the All-Highest?
Chapter 4: The Destruction of Frank Olson.
November 18, 1953. Deep Run Farm, a CIA retreat in the Blue Ridge Mountains of western Maryland. 17 men had gathered for what was described as a working retreat. The meeting was cover. The real purpose was something that Sidney Gottlieb had decided needed to happen, an experiment on his own colleagues. At dinner on the first evening, Gottlieb spiked the Cointreau with LSD. He told the men what he had done 20 minutes after they drank it. By then, the drug was already entering their bloodstreams. Among the men at that table was Frank Rudolph Olson, a tall, thoughtful man of 43 who worked as a bacteriologist for the Army's Special Operations Division at Fort Detrick, Maryland, one of America's most sensitive biological weapons research facilities. Olson was a scientist, meticulous, brilliant, deeply committed to his work. There are suggestions, not confirmed but persistent, that Olson had been having doubts about certain programs he was involved in, that he had expressed reservations about what he had seen during trips to Europe, where the CIA was testing biological and chemical agents.
What is documented is that Frank Olson reacted to his LSD dosing with extreme psychological distress. In the days after the Deep Run Farm retreat, those around him noted that he had become withdrawn, agitated, haunted. He told his wife Alice that he had made a terrible mistake. He told colleagues that he was thinking of quitting the CIA. He was brought to New York City, to a hotel near Rockefeller Center called the Statler Hotel, ostensibly to see a psychiatrist, himself a CIA contractor who had received substantial MK-Ultra funding. At approximately 2:30 in the morning on November 28, 1953, 9 days after the Cointreau at Deep Run Farm, Frank Olson fell from a window on the 13th floor of the Statler Hotel and died on the sidewalk below. He had been sharing the room with a CIA officer named Robert Lashbrook, who called Gottlieb before he called emergency services. The death was ruled a suicide within hours. The Olson family was given money and told a sanitized version of events. Frank's son, Eric, who was 9 years old when his father died, accepted this version for a while. Then he began to question it.
Chapter 5: Dr. Cameron's Chamber of Horrors. To understand what happened at the Allen Memorial Institute at McGill University in Montreal, it is necessary to understand who Dr. Ewen Cameron was. Because Cameron was not a fringe figure, not a rogue scientist operating outside the bounds of respectable medicine. He was, in the 1950s and early 1960s, one of the most celebrated psychiatrists in the English-speaking world. He had served as the first president of the World Psychiatric Association. He had been president of the American Psychiatric Association in 1952 and 1953. His appointments were prestigious, his publications numerous, his institutional position unassailable. What Cameron believed, with the fervor of a true believer, with the arrogance of a man who had never been seriously challenged, was that the human personality could be erased and replaced. He called his approach psychic driving, and its premise was as simple as it was terrifying. If you could destroy the pathological patterns of thought and behavior that constituted mental illness, you could reprogram the patient with healthy patterns.
The patient would emerge as a new person, cured not by addressing the causes of their illness, but by erasing the illness along with everything else that made them who they were.
Cameron's depatterning process began with drug-induced sleep. Patients were kept unconscious or in a drug-induced stupor for weeks or months at a time, using combinations of barbiturates, chlorpromazine, and other sedatives. While they lay insensible, they were subjected to electroconvulsive therapy, administered at voltages and frequencies far beyond anything considered therapeutically appropriate, up to 40 times the normal therapeutic dose, delivered multiple times daily. The theory was that this would wipe the slate clean, destroy the existing personality patterns so completely that new ones could be implanted. Once the depatterning was complete, Cameron moved to the reprogramming phase. Using a technique he called psychic driving, he played audio recordings through speakers placed under the patient's pillows or through headsets, repeating pre-recorded messages hundreds of thousands of times over weeks. Messages intended to replace the erased personality with a new one, constructed according to Cameron's therapeutic vision. The results were catastrophic. Patients emerged from Cameron's treatment not cured, but devastated. Some required institutional care for the rest of their lives. Some never remembered their own pasts.
Chapter 6: The Documents That Survived.
January 1973. Richard Helms, the CIA's director, sat in his office with the knowledge that his tenure was ending and that the walls were closing in. The Watergate scandal had already begun to unravel the Nixon administration, and Helms understood that a change of administration meant investigators, oversight committees, and the terrifying possibility of exposure. On his orders, CIA officers began the systematic destruction of the MK-Ultra files. The shredders ran for days, tens of thousands of documents, the records of 150 sub-projects conducted over 2 decades, the evidence of human beings dosed with drugs without their knowledge, of psychiatric patients destroyed by an agency they had never heard of a man who might have been murdered in a New York hotel room, were reduced to confetti and incinerated. Helms later acknowledged having given the order. He was never prosecuted for it. The destruction of government records is a federal crime. The destruction of evidence of crimes, even more so. In Helms' case, as in so many cases involving the most senior figures in the history of American intelligence, the law that applied to ordinary citizens did not apply.
But Helms made a mistake. A collection of MK-Ultra financial records, approximately 20,000 documents, had been stored not in the main CIA archive where the purge was taking place, but in a separate facility, a record storage building at the CIA's Retired Records Center in Warrenton, Virginia. They were filed under the institutional heading of financial administration rather than operations. When the destruction order came, no one thought to check the financial records building. The documents survived. They sat there unexamined for 4 years. Then, in 1977, a journalist named John Marks filed a Freedom of Information Act request that specifically targeted financial and administrative records. The documents were discovered. The 20,000 pages that emerged from that records building in Warrenton were not the complete history of MK-Ultra. The destruction had ensured that could never be recovered. But they were enough. They were more than enough. What the documents revealed was not a rogue operation conducted by a few bad actors. The financial records showed systematic, institutionally approved funding flowing through official CIA channels to dozens of research institutions. MK-Ultra was not a conspiracy theory. It was a policy.
Chapter 7: The Senate hearings, when the truth came out.
August 3rd, 1977. The Senate hearing room in Washington was packed. Cameras rolled. Senators arranged their papers with the careful deliberateness of men who understood they were participating in a moment of historical consequence. At the witness table sat Admiral Stansfield Turner, the CIA's newly appointed director, a man who had inherited this catastrophe from his predecessors and who had chosen the path of at least partial disclosure. The hearing was formally titled Project MK-Ultra, the CIA's program of research in behavioral modification. Turner's testimony was remarkable not for what it revealed. By this point, the surviving documents had already established the basic outline of the program, but for what a senior CIA official formally and publicly acknowledged. The United States government had for approximately 2 decades conducted covert programs of human experimentation involving the unwitting administration of psychoactive drugs, sensory deprivation, electroconvulsive therapy, and psychological torture. It had done so with the knowledge and approval of CIA directors, and it had then destroyed most of the evidence. The victims who testified gave the hearings their moral weight. A woman who identified herself only as a survivor of Dr. Cameron's experiments at McGill described in a voice that barely held together what had been done to her. She had come to the Allen Memorial Institute seeking treatment for depression. She had left, unable to remember her children's faces. She had spent years trying to reconstruct the memories that Cameron's machines had erased. Other survivors followed. Their testimony was not the controlled, legalistic language of senators and lawyers. It was the raw, unmediated language of people describing what it felt like to be used as a laboratory animal by your own government. The aftermath of the hearings produced reforms that on paper looked substantial. What the hearings did not produce was criminal prosecution. Sidney Gottlieb was questioned. Richard Helms was questioned about his role in destroying the files. No one went to prison. The men who had ordered, approved, funded, and conducted 2 decades of illegal human experimentation in the United States of America faced no criminal consequences.
Chapter 8. What came after? The unanswered questions.
The formal history of MK-Ultra ends in 1977 with the Senate hearings and the release of the surviving documents. But the deeper questions that MK-Ultra raises, questions about the nature of power, the boundaries of the state, the fragility of the ethical frameworks that protect ordinary people from the machinery of government, have not been answered, and they will not be answered by any archive release or congressional hearing. Frank Olson's case remains formally unresolved. The forensic evidence suggesting he may have been struck unconscious before his fall from that 13th floor window has never been definitively confirmed or refuted. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office investigated and declined to prosecute. Eric Olson, who has spent his adult life pursuing the truth of his father's death, is now elderly. The men who know what happened are dead. The window will remain open. The questions extend beyond the documented record into territory that is both more speculative and more urgent. What happened to MK-Ultra's successor programs? Did the behavioral modification research simply stop when the files were shredded? Or did it continue, under different names, with more careful attention to the kind of paper trails that could be exploited by FOIA requests? The culture that MKUltra created within the American national security establishment, the culture of impunity, of ends justify means reasoning, of contempt for the ordinary citizens whose safety the agency claimed to be defending, did not evaporate when the files were shredded or when Stansfield Turner apologized before the Senate. The most enduring legacy of MKUltra is not the specific techniques, not the 150 sub-projects, not even the individual tragedies of Frank Olson and the survivors of Cameron's experiments, and the unnamed men who were dosed with LSD by strangers in San Francisco's safe houses. The most enduring legacy is the knowledge that it happened. The proof documented in 20,000 pages of financial records that a CIA officer forgot to shred, that the phrase, "the government would never do that to its own citizens," is not a reassurance, but a hope, and a hope that was, for 20 years, demonstrably, devastatingly false. The Black Sorcerer is dead. The files are mostly gone. The safe houses have long since become ordinary apartments, their one-way mirrors removed, their walls painted over with the colors of ordinary life. But the questions are still with us. They are not going anywhere, and anyone who thinks they know the full answer has not been paying attention.